Welcome to the VBAC Link podcast. We are a team of expert doulas trained in supporting VBAC, have had VBACs of our own, and work extensively with VBAC women and their providers. We are here to provide detailed VBAC and cesarean prevention stories and facts in a simple, consolidated format. When we were moms preparing to VBAC, it was stories and information like we will be sharing in this podcast that helped fine-tune our intuition and build confidence in our birth preparations. We hope this does the same for you. To hear more about us and to hear our individual VBAC stories, be sure to check out episodes 1, 2, and 3. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not meant to replace advice from any other qualified medical professional.
Hi everyone. Happy Wednesday. This is Megan. Welcome to episode 10. We are super excited today. We've got Ashley from Georgia. She had a VBAC and she is going to share her story today. When she heard about our podcast, she contacted us and said she would love to share, and we are so excited. Her story is kind of about how she always felt like she was on a clock. So, Ashley, if you would not mind, feel free to go ahead and share your story.
Okay. So I'm Ashley. I currently live in Savannah, Georgia, and my first birth took place in Birmingham, Alabama, where we lived at the time. So my first pregnancy was pretty unremarkable. I had, just morning sickness here and there, but nothing. I wasn't really sick all the time. I was pretty active, went walking, and just had a really lovely pregnancy. And I took a breastfeeding class that was offered at the hospital, but I didn't take a labor and delivery class or like a child care class or anything. I felt like I kind of knew the basics, and I didn't really feel like that was going to be something I needed to do. I just thought I would go into labor at the hospital and have a baby. So fast forward to the end of my pregnancy, my husband was a medical resident at the time, and he was having to take his boards in Chicago. So we lived in Birmingham, and he was leaving to take boards in Chicago the week after my due date. So he had to take his boards on, I think it was June 13th, and my due date was June 8th. So I was a nervous wreck, and I was just constantly kind of waiting on labor to start. And I thought, maybe I'll have the baby early and he'll have a couple weeks at home. And I kept bothering my doctor. I'm like, when can we induce? What can we do? We need this baby to be here before he leaves to go take his boards. Well, my doctor, he was adamant that he would not induce. He really didn't want to induce at all, but he especially didn't want to induce before 40 weeks because with first-time moms and non-favorable cervix and everything, it just makes you more at risk to have a C-section. So he was like, I'm not going to induce. Well, so time goes on. I'm not dilated at all. My cervix is not favorable. It's closed, and I'm not even dilated a fingertip. And he's like, no, we're not going to induce. Well, I finally convinced him at my, I guess it was 39-week appointment, to agree to an induction. My husband came with me, and he was like, I really want to be here for the birth. I don't want to leave without the baby being born. So he agreed to try a Foley bulb induction on the Sunday after my due date. So it was due on June 8th, which was a Saturday, which was a Sunday, and he said he would let us come in that Sunday evening and start an induction on Monday. So it would have been 40 weeks one day. And so he did a membrane sweep as much as he could that day. When he did the cervical check, I was like barely a centimeter dilated. And we went home. This was like, I guess, a Wednesday or Thursday before my water broke. So I had some contractions after the membrane sweep, and then we went walking, and for those couple of days we walked and did the old wives' tales. We ate eggplant and ate spicy food and had sex and did all that kind of stuff to try to get labor started, but nothing really worked. So fast forward to Thursday night, which was June 5th. I went to bed and we went to sleep, and I was trying to get comfortable, and I was just kind of up and down all night, like kept going to the bathroom and getting back in bed. And finally, I was so uncomfortable, and I wanted my husband to be able to sleep. He was studying for his boards and trying to work up until I went into labor. So that night around 1 or so, I kept fidgeting and tossing and turning, and I finally went and laid on the couch. Well, I laid on the couch, and all of a sudden I felt kind of a pop and like a little trickle of water. And I had just peed, so I was like, I knew that it wasn't urine. So I went to the bathroom, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my water broke. It kind of gushed out after I sat down. And so I called my husband, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my water broke. And so he was kind of freaking out, like, oh my gosh, like, he's up. It's like 2 a.m, and he was, we're like running around, like, oh, what do we do? So I got in the shower. I called triage, and they were like, okay, well, if you think it's your water, you need to come in. Just come in as soon as you can. Which now that I'm more educated on birth, I know that I shouldn't have gone right in. But so I took a shower, and he took a shower. We kind of finished packing and took pictures of my belly, and it was like about an hour later we headed into the hospital. And so this was about 2 a.m. my water broke, and we got to the hospital around 3:30, and we went into triage, and they tested to make sure my water had actually broken, and it had. And so they decided to admit me, and I was only like a centimeter dilated at the time. So this was, by the time we got to the labor and delivery room, it was probably 4 a.m., and the doctor who was there decided to just see if my body would kind of kickstart. Like, I was having irregular contractions, but I wasn't having strong contractions. I mean, I didn't even know I was having contractions until they hooked me up to the monitor. So the baby was fine, and they were like, well, let's just see if things will kickstart and you'll kind of go into labor on your own. So they had told me after that first cervical check, they were like, we want to limit cervical checks to maximum like every 4 hours, because we don't want to introduce bacteria. So at 8 a.m. there was a shift change, and a new doctor came in, and she was like, why is she not on Pitocin? She was kind of frustrated that they hadn't started the Pitocin because I wasn't contracting regularly. So she ordered the Pitocin, and they started it, and I was hooked up to a monitor. So my water had broken, so I'm having constant water coming out with every contraction, and so that was kind of miserable. But so I sat in the bed for a while, and I was on the Pitocin and having contractions, and I could feel like when they were going to start, but they weren't super strong. But I didn't know any different, and I hadn't really had any Braxton Hicks contractions during pregnancy very much. Like, sometimes if I would really walk fast, or exert myself, I'd have a contraction here and there, but they were never really painful. So I decided to stand up next to the bed, and so she checked me at 8, and I was still at 8 a.m., and I was still only 1 to 2 centimeters. So then I stood up, and I was on the Pitocin. I was standing next to the bed. They put the squat bar. I was kind of trying to do squats and get the baby to come down, and they checked me again at noon, and I had progressed to 3 centimeters, but which now looking back, I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. I just reread my birth story and kind of made a couple notes to have a timeline. But so I was contracting like every 2 to 3 minutes, and they weren't super painful, but I didn't know any different. Well, at 4 p.m., I still hadn't really progressed much from that last check, and they were concerned that my contractions were not strong enough. So they decided to put an internal monitor in. And so I didn't want to get the epidural before I was at 4 centimeters. I just had this arbitrary, goal in mind that I wanted to be at least 4 centimeters before I got an epidural. So they decided to put an internal monitor in to monitor just how strong the contractions were. So they did that, and that was very, very painful. I didn't have an epidural. And so she put the internal monitor in, and they realized that my contractions were not strong enough. So they decided to start upping the Pitocin every 15 minutes. And the whole time, my daughter's heart rate was perfect. They even commented, like, her strip is perfect. She's having great accelerations, and she looks beautiful, and everything's good, but, we need you to start progressing faster. And kind of had, like, thrown around C-section if we're not progressing fast enough, because it had already been over 12 hours since my water had broken. And so they were, they had kind of put me on that clock, like, we need to deliver the baby within 24 hours, after your water break. So they were just, after they started the Pitocin, they started upping it, like, every 15 minutes, they'd up it a unit. And so I was starting to really, feel it, and, like, okay, like, if this is how it's going to be, like, yeah, I need to get the epidural. And my nurse was like, if you want, like, she could see that I was in pain, and I was, like, trying, I wasn't coping well. I was starting to really hurt, and I was getting really nauseated, and she was like, let me, put in the order for the anesthesiologist. So I was like, okay, that sounds good. This is at, like, 6:30 p.m., so my water broke at 2 a.m., so I had been laboring for a while. And so they get the resident. It was a medical resident who came in to do the epidural. We were at a teaching hospital in Birmingham, so he comes in, and he's kind of nervous, and come to find out, my husband's like, yeah, he probably just started his second year of anesthesia, like, which he didn't tell me all this at the time until afterwards, and I'm like, really? Oh my gosh. So the resident is doing my epidural, and he's, like, asking the attending physician the questions on, like, how to place it, and I'm kind of like, oh, you don't know what you're doing? Like, what is going on? And so I was kind of freaking out, but he placed it, and it was good, and I could still feel the contractions, which was good. It was kind of a light epidural, but it made me kind of immediately hot and kind of itchy. And so I was I don't know, I just felt kind of icky, but I laid there, and my nurse kept helping me, like, switch sides and try to get my cervix to change faster. So this was at about 2 a.m., they noticed that the baby's heart rate was kind of starting to accelerate. So it started going faster than normal. And so they checked my temperature, and because I was really hot, and they checked my temperature, and I had a fever. And so they were concerned that I had a uterine infection, and that the baby could be, being affected by this. So the maternal fetal medicine doc who was on call that night, he was watching her strip, and he's the one who had come in and been like, oh, she looks beautiful, everything's great, we're just keeping a close eye on her. So he came in, and he was like, look, if she doesn't stabilize, and if your fever doesn't break, we're gonna need to get her out, because we're worried about her. So I'm like panicking. This is at 2 a.m. and he's like, we're gonna give you some Tylenol, and I want you to put the oxygen mask on and just really try to relax and stay calm, and we're gonna, like, keep checking on her. So I was like, okay. So an hour later, my fever had broken, and my temperature had come back down to normal, and she had stabilized. And so we continued. They were going to let me continue the labor. And so it had been 24 hours since my water had broken, and I had chorioamnitis is what it's called, where you have an infection in your uterus. So, so at about 7 in the morning, my nurse kept having me switch sides, and I was, like, at a 9, but I had, like, a little bit of a cervical lift, and she's like, we need to get this last little bit out of the way, and then we're going to start pushing. So by about, like, 7:15, 7:30, she was like, oh my gosh, we're at 10 centimeters, and we're ready. And so she got the little tray in there, and, had everything all set up, and, so I was, like, so excited that we were at pushing stage and everything. And so my nurse, it was just my nurse and my husband, and there were some techs and people coming in and out of the room, just kind of getting everything set up for the baby to be born. And so excited, and I was doing some practice pushes, and she's like, okay, and I could feel, I'd had the epidural, but I could feel all the pressure and everything, and felt like I was making a change. And they were like, yes, you're doing great. Well, then my doctor, so I had several shift changes, like every like 12 hours, I guess, or maybe every like 8 hours, I had a new doctor who was coming on. So I saw like 4 doctors that day. And so it's June. I thought I was going to have her on June 6th because my water broke early in the morning, June 6th, but that didn't happen. So it's June 7th in the morning, and my doctor comes in, and she looked very somber and concerned, and I thought, well, something must have happened next door. Like, what? Like, we're excited in here. Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And she looked at me, and she was like, Ashley, we need to get this baby out. She's like, I'm going to watch you push a few times, and if we can get her head low enough to deliver her emergently with like forceps or vacuum, then I'll let you try to get her out vaginally. But if not, we're going to need to get you into the OR and get her out, because her heart rate is decelling and it's not coming back up quick enough, and we're concerned about her not getting enough oxygen. And so cue major freak out. So I'm like, oh my gosh, we get her out, like, just let's go. We got to get her out, So we're like, I'm like sobbing, and everybody's like, it's okay, you're okay. My nurse, it's shift change time for my nurse, and so I was upset because I wasn't going to have my nurse that's been with me for the past 12 hours with me, and she was like, don't worry, like, I'm going to come with you, just don't worry. She was such a godsend. She kept me calm. And so they're like, there's a flurry of people coming in. They turned the Pitocin off, and my daughter's heart rate kind of stabilized, but they still were concerned because I had the fever, and then she was having all those decelerations. So they were like, we're going to let you stay awake. Like, we don't need to put you to sleep as long as the epidural can be upped and everything. So the anesthesiologist came back in and administered different medicine to make the epidural stronger so I wouldn't feel anything. And it worked. And from the time they decided to do the section to the time they had cut my belly open was probably like 15 minutes or so.
Wow.
This is pretty fast.
Yeah.
So they sent my husband to the little room and scrubbed, he got all scrubbed in and everything. And she came out screaming, and she had, good outguards. She was like 9 and 9. And the thing I was most upset about was that golden hour of bonding. And like, I had pictured, having my baby put on my chest and, being able to see her and hold her and breastfeed and do all this stuff. And so that I was so upset about that with the C-section, and they agreed to not tie my arms down and to put her on my chest as soon as she checked out and that she was okay. So after she was born, they took her over and did her APGARs and kind of cleaned her off and made sure she was breathing okay and all that. And then they put her on my chest, and she was crying, and then she kind of calmed down, and I was able to kind of like look at her as best I could with my being laying down, and and then I kind of started shaking from the medicine, and so I had them take her, and my husband got to hold her, and we did recover. They finished the surgery and wheeled me into recovery, and I was able to hold her and nurse her, and she was perfectly healthy, and it was good. We stayed in the hospital for we were in the hospital for 3 nights, and I had to have IV antibiotics, like 3 different antibiotics.
Infection.
Yes, because of the infection, and she had to do antibiotics for the first 36 hours. She had to have a little IV and do antibiotics, and she'd have to go to the nursery for an hour every 4 or 6 hours. She'd have to go and go to the nursery for an hour and get her IV antibiotics, which was really sad. But she did great, and so that was my first birth. It was not ideal, of course, because my husband had to go and take his board. So we got home from the hospital. She was born on Saturday. We got home from the hospital Tuesday night, like pretty late, and he had to leave to go to Chicago on Wednesday. I was at home with this tiny baby, and my mom came and helped while he was gone. He was gone for 3 or 4 days. So the worst part of the C-section recovery.
The hardest part of recovery.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for your mom.
Yes, it was pretty hard. It was just exhausting and really, really hard and just totally unexpected. Like that's just not how I pictured my birth to go.
Yeah.
And so after my initial shock of like, oh my gosh, I had a C-section, I was sad about it, but I felt like I couldn't really be sad about it. And people are like, well, at least y'all are healthy. And, of course that's wonderful. And that's the ultimate goal. I mean, you want to have a living baby and a living mom and be alive and healthy, but I was still mourning the loss of the birth that I really wanted to have. And, that was tough. And at my 6-week checkup with my doctor, he agreed. My doctor that I had gone to my whole pregnancy, he wasn't the one who ended up delivering me because he wasn't on call and it was a weekend. So that was kind of sad because I really loved him. But he agreed that I would be a good candidate for VBAC because I had dilated to 10 and I was at pushing stage, and it was because of fetal heart tones for the reason for my C-section. So he was supportive of the trial of labor for my next pregnancy, whenever that would be. So fast forward, we moved to Savannah, Georgia, and we decided that we wanted to try and have another baby. So we started trying to get pregnant, and it just wasn't happening. It took like 11 cycles to get pregnant, which with my daughter, it didn't take that long. And so we were starting to get concerned. So I had gone to my doctor, and she agreed, since I was under 35, she agreed that after 12 months of trying that we could talk to a fertility doctor and see if there was, some reason why we weren't getting pregnant. So they did an ultrasound and looked at my uterus, and everything looked normal and everything looked healthy. My ovaries looked good and everything. So, and they had taken some hormone levels and everything looked healthy and normal. So she was like, I don't know why you're not getting pregnant, but she's like, maybe try to lose, try to lose 5 to 10 pounds and see if that'll help. She's like, I don't know, sometimes that helps. So it was in January, and I was like, okay. So I really did my New Year's resolution, and I went on a diet and I started exercising, and that month I got pregnant. So I don't know if that was a fluke or if that, if I would have gotten pregnant anyway, or if that helped. I started my pregnancy, and I was like the lowest weight I had been in a while. So I got pregnant, and I decided I was going to try and find a VBAC supportive provider, which is kind of hard to do in Savannah where we live. So I went on some mom message boards, and they referred me to some female doctors that are VBAC supportive. So I went in, and I called when I got a positive pregnancy test, and they were like, okay, you can come in this day, and we may or may not do an early ultrasound. I was going to be like right at 6 weeks pregnant. So I went in, they did an ultrasound, and they saw the gestational sac, but they didn't see the baby. But they were like, it's probably fine, everything's fine. And we talked about the potential to have a trial of labor. And so come to find out, I was I should have kind of asked more questions, which now I know from reading more VBAC websites and articles and all that kind of stuff. She was like, as long as you're, you don't gain too much weight, as long as you don't have gestational diabetes or any other, health problems, as long as the baby is projected to weigh less than 9 pounds, as long as there were like all these things that I had to do to be able to
meet.
Just to have a trial of labor.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, okay, like, okay, I can do all these things, I'm like, I'm pretty confident I could have pushed my daughter out if she wouldn't have been having heart decelerations. And, they were like, yeah, we got to get your surgical report and make sure the incision was this, and make sure that the reason wasn't because of CPD, and, make sure her head wasn't too big, which she did have a really big head, but come to find out, so did my son, so that had nothing to do with that. But so she told me, all these things, and so at the time, there just really aren't very many doctors who will agree to let you have VBAC, and there are some doctors who will, but then their partners in the group won't support it, and so it just depends on who's on call. So I decided to go with the doctors I did because they try to deliver their own patients, and they're in a practice together. So I thought, okay, this is my best chance. And so fast forward through my pregnancy. My pregnancy was a little bit harder. I mean, I had a toddler, so I was tired and I was really nauseated. I had to take nausea medicine, but it was, we made it through that. And then I got to about, the beginning of third trimester, I started getting a rash and really, really itchy. And my doctor was like, I think it's probably just contact dermatitis, like try to change your laundry detergent or try to do this. And so I was like, okay, we'll come to find out. A couple weeks later, it got significantly worse. Well, I was diagnosed with PUPS, which is...
I wondered when you said that.
Oh, my gosh, it was miserable. So I had PUPS at like 27 weeks. So it was a really rough pregnancy. I was sick, and then I got food poisoning at like 32 weeks when we went on our baby moon. I got really bad food poisoning and didn't enjoy that at all. I was like 32 weeks pregnant and vomiting and,
You poor thing.
having contractions, and so I was like kind of freaking out a little bit. And then fast forward to 36 weeks, we had a Hurricane Irma was projected to hit Savannah at a Category 4. It was right at 36 weeks. I was packing. We were going to evacuate. Of course, my parents are freaking out. They're in Alabama. They're freaking out, like, you got to get out of there,
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to leave. And that night, I started having some spotting. And so I was concerned, like, oh, my goodness, I really hope I'm not going, I hope I don't go into labor right now. I'm 36 weeks pregnant and all this stuff is happening. So I called my doctor, and they were like, okay, we'll come in. Like, we've had some cancellations because everybody's getting out of town, and we'll check you out. And they were going to do an ultrasound around 36 weeks anyway, just to check on fluid and check on growth and make sure everything, make sure he was looking good. So I went in, and they were going to give me a medical sheet to take with me if we evacuated, so that the doctor in another city would know that I had had prenatal care and all that, and kind of just a general overview of my pregnancy so far. And so she did the ultrasound, and he was measuring about 6.5 pounds and about 75th for all the measurements, like head and belly and all that. So they were like, yeah, he's looking good. He's projected he's probably going to weigh about 8 pounds, which is what my daughter weighed 8'8" when she was born. I left that out, but she weighed 8'8" and was 20.5 inches long. So she was, a good sized baby.
Good,
but
yeah.
So they wanted, one of the stipulations for my VBAC for them to really be quote unquote supportive was for the baby to weigh less than 9 pounds. So I was like, okay, so he's projected to weigh about 8 pounds by 40 weeks. So I was like, okay, good. Did a cervical check just to see if there was any changes since I was having the spotting, and I was about 1 centimeter and about 50% of face. So she was like, your cervix doesn't feel like a lady who's about to go into labor. She's like, I think hopefully he will stay in and everything will be fine, and we won't have a baby while everybody's evacuated.
Yeah.
And she was like, we're probably going to stay here, but they are closing the women's labor and delivery for that hospital. So they were only keeping Memorial Hospital, which is like the main public hospital, open. But they were closing all of the specialty clinics for the other hospital because of the evacuation. So she was like, you can't come, like if you go into labor and you stay here, you cannot come to this hospital because they won't have anybody on staff to like do an emergency C-section or whatever. So I was like, okay, but we were kind of like hedging our bets, and we kept watching it, and the hurricane ended up going more west of us, and so we were kind of spared, thankfully. But we still evacuated. We still evacuated out of our flood zone to my sister-in-law's house, which was closer into town, just so we would, if we did have flooding, which our neighborhood having some flooding, but since we were in a mandatory evacuation zone, the ambulance wouldn't be able to come to get us if I had gone into labor or something. So it was fine, and everything was fine. I didn't go into labor. So my doctor I declined cervical checks weeks 37, 38. I just didn't really feel like it was going to be helpful. But at 39 weeks, I was like, okay, let's see if anything's changed. And I was 2 centimeters, 70% effaced, which I was so excited about.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, good. We're like moving in the right direction. And she asked if I wanted to have a membrane sweep, and I declined because my doula. So I didn't talk about. Around 30 weeks, I had decided I really wanted to hire a doula because I had read all these studies about how a doula decreases your chance of having a cesarean, and they're really great for having an extra birth support person. My husband was kind of like, okay, if that's really what you want, then we can do that. But he's kind of thought it was weird. And I mean, I'm like, I'm not really a crunchy hippie person, and that's kind of what I thought doulas, they work with those kind of people. But it was really great for me, and she was so awesome. And we from about 30 weeks, we interviewed her and really liked her, and decided to work with her. And she is trained in hypnobirthing, and so she had given me all the hypnobirthing material. So I had been doing some hypnobirthing, and she teaches yoga, and so I had done a couple yoga classes. And anyway, that's kind of like off tangent, but I forgot about hiring her as a doula. So she was a very important support person during all of these upcoming OB appointments. So I had talked about 39 weeks. I was 2 centimeters, 70%, and I didn't want to do a membrane sweep because my doula was going out of town. This was like the only time she was going to be out of town she was just going out of town for the night, but I didn't want to go into labor and her not be here.
Right.
So I was like, no, we'll just do some other stuff. So we were trying, the old wives' tales type things, doing the foods and sex and walking and all that kind of stuff. The next week I went to my 40-week appointment, and I was 40 weeks, 2 days, and I was 2 centimeters and she said a little bit more effaced. So, but that his head was still pretty high and kind of floating. It wasn't really like sitting on my cervix. He wasn't engaged totally. And so she did a membrane sweep, and I was having contractions all night long. It was pretty strong. I went to the grocery store after, and I was walking around and kind of like, whoa, okay. Like I was having some contractions, so I thought maybe this is going to do something. And so I called. My in-laws lived 2 hours away in Charleston, and they were going to come and stay with my daughter while we went to the hospital for the delivery. So they were kind of on call, like on edge, like, when is this baby going to come? Because I was already past due at this point. And so they decided to go ahead and come into town. I was like, yeah, I may go into labor. I don't know. I'm having some contractions. And they were like, we'll just come just in case you go into labor overnight, so we won't be driving in the middle of the night. And so they came down, and I was having contractions, and then they kind of petered out. But then the next morning I woke up, and I was having pretty decent contractions, about like 5 to 7 minutes apart, like for several hours, and I was losing my mucus plug, and I thought, okay, like we're gonna have this baby.
This is gonna happen
today,
yeah.
Maybe I'm gonna go into full-blown labor. Well, I didn't. So I had the membrane on Friday, went the whole weekend. I'm like having, contractions off and on, and I'm on baby watch, like everybody's looking at me. Like I felt like people were just staring at me like, are you having a contraction? You know? I'm like, no, I'm good. But I was constantly like losing mucus plug, and I thought, okay, anytime now. And we were walking and, just trying to get the baby out. But so on Monday I had another doctor's appointment. So I was 5 days past due on the Monday, on October 9th. So I was still only dilated to 2 and 80% effaced, and he was still up pretty high. Like she was like, his head is floating. And they had already told me, like the very beginning of my pregnancy, they're like, we do not induce VBAC. We do not just start from scratch and induce. They're like, if you're in kind of a contraction pattern, we will augment with Pitocin, a very low dose, and we don't do any other type of induction besides like a membrane sweep. Okay, so at that appointment, thankfully my husband went with me because she did the cervical check and she was like, his head is still pretty high. And she said, we have your C-section scheduled for October 11th at 1:30 p.m. And so I'm like, I get emotional just like reading the story and talking about it. So this is the Monday, and she was like, she's like, I don't want you to be upset about this. Like, I want you to be peaceful, and be happy on your baby's birthday. And I was like, I've prepared for this. I've done everything. Like, I haven't gained too much weight. My blood pressure is good. I don't have diabetes. My baby's head down. He's not projected to be huge. Like, my belly's measuring normal. My fluid is good. Like, what else can I do? Like, I've done everything that they asked me to do. So I was just like so defeated, and I was like, please just give me some Pitocin. Like, I've been having these contractions, and I really think that I really think my body will deliver this baby. Like, but I can't. What can I do? We even joked about like getting black market Pitocin, and she was like, oh, please don't do that. And I was like, of course I'm not going to do that, but she's like, you'd be surprised. She's like, we had a patient one time get like some street Cytotec and try to like induce labor, and it was really bad. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I would never do that. But so she could tell how upset I was, and I feel like she was really feeling for me. But she was like, we'll make the C-section really peaceful, and we'll try to do everything that you want. And so I talked to her about a C-section birth plan if that was what was going to happen, and she had agreed to do skin to skin immediately and lower the drape and do all that sort of thing to make it as peaceful and family centered as possible. And so we left, and I was a mess. I was just crying, and like I just didn't know what to do. So my doula had recommended to me to go to see a chiropractor or do acupuncture or we have a Remedy float. It's like a float tank to really relax. It's like where you're in total darkness and the saltwater thing. But so they didn't have any appointments for that. The chiropractor didn't have any appointments, but I was able to get into an acupuncture appointment. So after that, I was so upset. My eyes were swollen shut from crying so much, and it was just so sad that I really thought, okay, I guess I'm just going to have a C-section. I don't have any other choice. And so that afternoon I went to my acupuncture appointment, and she was so sweet and calming and just so kind, and she did acupuncture. I had never had any acupuncture done before. So we kind of talked about my previous birth, and she was like, I feel like you're just bringing a lot of anxiety and trauma into this, and you really need, I want you to try to get that out of your mind and really try to relax. And so she did some like anxiety points to try to help release that anxiety. And then she did the points for reproductive organs to like bring the blood flow and try to like induce labor. So I was there for like probably an hour or so, and I felt a lot better whenever I left that appointment. I felt more peaceful, and I was just like, okay, like, if this is what's going to be, then I'll be fine. I'll be okay, you know. So I got home and just tried to, like, enjoy the time that I had with my daughter, and we just had a good evening. We baked cupcakes for the baby, and we were like, I was like, okay, you know, this baby's coming, and one way or another he's going to be here on the 11th, like, or before, you know. But that's October 11th is going to be his birthday if I don't go into labor. So so that's October 9th. And so my doula, I called her, and she did a hypnobirthing track with me, and we did, like, a visualization. It was another fear release. We had done a couple fear releases before, and, like, where you talk about your fears and kind of, you know, envision yourself, like, crumbling the paper and burning it and, like, throwing it away, and you're, like, releasing all those fears from your body so that you're able to, like, invite a peaceful birth or whatever. And so she did that with me that day, and we envisioned, like, the final product of a VBAC and, like, holding the baby and just, like, a peaceful delivery, and, you know, envisioned all this happiness and stuff. And so we talked to the baby where you, like, it sounds so weird when I'm, like, saying it right now, but we're, like, talking to the baby, and she was, like, telling me, like, you know, telling him, like, it's okay to come, baby, and just wiggle your way out, just push down, and we're like envisioning, like, the cervix opening and all this stuff. So that was good and peaceful, and I was like, okay, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So Tuesday morning I woke up, and I wasn't really having prodromal labor anymore. It had kind of stopped, but I talked to my doula. I was peaceful, and then I started freaking out again the day before. And so she was like, just call your doctor and see if she'll do another membrane sweep. She's like, just call her. So I called the office, and my doctor called me back, and she's like, I've been thinking about you, and I want you to come back in, and we'll try another sweep and see. We'll see if you've had any change, and we'll try to do it again. She's like, I was thinking about you, and I talked to the other doctor, and, you know, we're going to try this. She's like, okay. So I got myself ready and went back to the doctor. And she had another sweep. My cervix was still the same, and his head was still floating, but she was like, you know, I want you to, like, go walk, like, after this sweep, go walk and try to do some squats and really try to get him to come down. And she's like, if you start having contractions and, like, if you start having timable contractions, I want you to come back to the hospital. And she told, you know, we had done a hospital tour and everything, and so she's like, you go here and check in, and, you know, I'm here, and I'll come back over. So this is in the afternoon. So my husband went with me. He had taken off work a week after I was due because we thought for sure we were going to have this baby. You know, by 40 weeks. So this is like 40 weeks, 6 days, and still no baby, which it was nice for him to be off work because he could go walking with me, and, you know, we went to lunch, and it was like every day was like, is this our last day without a new baby? And so
yeah,
it was nice. So we, like, my daughter, we spent a lot of time with her, and we, like, did fun things, and so it was good. I mean, looking back, it was good, but it was very stressful because we were against the clock and, like, wondering when this baby was going to come, and, like, the C-section was on the 11th if he didn't come. So we went to the mall, which was close to the hospital. My daughter was with my in-laws because they were still in town. Bless them, they had come. They were still in town waiting for this baby, and they had her, and she was happy with her cousins playing, and we went to the mall, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked, and I was having contractions, and I was rubbing Clary Sage oil, like, on my belly and on my wrists, and I was having contractions. Like, anytime I was, like, actively walking, I was having contractions, but if I would stop, they would kind of peter out. So we stopped, and we had a snack, and then we were walking again, and they started becoming more painful. So I was like, okay, you know, my husband had a contraction timer, and we're timing them, and they're kind of getting closer together. And so I'm like, okay, good. So we go back to the hospital, which wasn't that far away, but in the parking lot, I vomited. Like, the contractions were pretty
Getting
intense.
intense.
So I'm thinking, like, okay, good, you know, like I'm going into labor. Now thinking of it, I think I was just really anxious and nervous, you know, hindsight. So we go check in, and they called a little person to come down with a wheelchair to bring me to triage. And my doctor was still, I don't know if she was still at her office or still at the hospital at the time, but she was there. So she was going to come by and check me if I had come back to triage. So, because she had seen me earlier that day. So the nurse, the triage nurse, gets me hooked up to the monitor, and I was having some contractions, but they were kind of irregular, and of course I had stopped. I was sitting still on the bed, so they had kind of petered out a little bit. So I was like, dang it, you know, like now I'm not having contractions, and I was freaking out, and my pulse was racing, and the nurse was she was like, your pulse is really high, like the alarm kept going off. And she's like, I was like, yes, I'm freaking out. Like, I'm freaking out. That's why my pulse is so high. And she was like, well, you need to try to calm down because it's kind of concerning, and I don't want you to end up having to stay, you know. And I was like, no, I don't want to stay. So I tried to calm down. My doctor came in. She checked me, and his head was still floating. And so she was like, his head is still just not low enough. I don't feel comfortable breaking your water, because I don't want you to have like a cord prolapse and then end up, you know, being rushed into an emergency section because of cord prolapse. Like, I'd rather have a scheduled, you know, gentle, calm C-section.
Mm-hmm.
Which I agreed, and I understood what she was saying, but I was like, gosh, I just really want a chance to do this. And so she did another membrane sweep, and she's like, you know, I'll see you tomorrow. And, you know, if you start having contractions tonight and they're timeable, please come back in.
Come in.
And so I'm like, I mean, of course, I'm like bawling. My doula had ended up, I called her after we were walking, and she came up to the hospital, and I talked to her, and she was like, you know, she's like, I just really, you know, I feel like your body is doing so much work, and I feel like it's not over. You know, she's like, it's still not over. And she was just so positive and, like, peaceful, and just like, you know, your body is doing all this great work, and this is not all for nothing. Like, you haven't had prodromal labor and had all these contractions for nothing. And so I was like, I'll call you, you know. Hopefully I'll call you.
Yeah.
And so we got home. We went and got my daughter. We got home. I, like, rocked her to sleep, and we talked about the C-section, because that was one of my driving forces to want to have a VBAC so bad, was so that I could take care of her and take care of my new baby and not be, you know, just feel healthier and stronger and not feel like a surgery patient. And so I was grieving her becoming a sister and not being an only child, but I was also grieving this possibility of feeling terrible after birth. And like, my doctor was like, you know, Ashley, there's no guarantee that you won't feel terrible after a vaginal birth. You know, sometimes vaginal births are traumatic, and women can't just hop up and take care of their toddlers too. And I was like, I know, but I just, you know, comparing my friends' birth stories who've had vaginal deliveries versus, you know, C-sections. C-sections are always a longer recovery, and they're harder. And so I talked to my daughter, and she was very upset about, you know, because I told her, I said, you know, if mommy goes to the hospital and we have to, you know, and I have to have my belly cut to get the baby out, then, you know, I'm not going to be able to pick you up and put you in your bed and stuff like that. And I was just trying to kind of, like, prepare her for that, because she was still very much like a mama's girl and, like, wanted to be carried everywhere, and, you know, like, it was going to be a mess if I had to have a C-section. So we talked about it, and the next morning, so that night, so we ate a big dinner, and I was kind of having contractions while we were eating, but I was like, I didn't really say anything. My in-laws were back at our house just so they would be there for the morning of us having to leave to go to the hospital. We went to bed, and we were watching Friends on Netflix, just trying to, like, chill, and I started having contractions. This is at, like, probably 10:30 or so. And so I'm like having contractions, and we're watching it, and I notice it's like every 4 minutes I feel it's a pretty strong contraction. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I didn't want to get too excited, but I was like, maybe this is it. And so after an hour, I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait an hour of having contractions every 4 minutes for an hour before I call Ann just to tell her, my doula. So I call her, and I'm like, you know, I'm having contractions every 4 minutes, and they're pretty strong, but I'm not ready to go to the hospital or anything. And she's like, okay, well, just call, like, you know, just call me. My phone's on. Just call me if you need to in the middle of the night. So I'm like, okay. So I laid there, and we turned off the TV, and we were trying to go to sleep. And throughout the night, I kept waking up to pee, and every time I woke up, I had like some mucus plug and like a little bit of blood. And so I'm like, okay, maybe things. It's like I kept waking up. I'd have a contraction here or there. They weren't like consistently 4 minutes apart all night or anything. So the next morning, I get up, and I'm like, okay, I want to take Leela to school. You know, I want to do everything like normal and take her to school and kiss her goodbye and do all that. So we did that, and my surgery wasn't scheduled until 1:30 in the afternoon, which at the time I was like, well, if I'm going to have a C-section, I just want to get it over with. Like, why am I going to wait till 1:30? Thank goodness it was till 1:30 because that gave us some more time. So I've kind of resolved myself that I'm nervous, and I'm freaking out. Like, I really don't want to go. And my husband was like, he's like, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do? We can't just not go. And I'm like, I just really don't want to go. It's going to be fine. Like, we're going to just do it. So we go to the hospital, and I had called my doula. She was going to come and do some fear releases and just kind of talk to us before the C-section anyway. Even if I did have to have a C-section, she couldn't go back with us, but she could be there in pre-op and post-op. She was there, and she was like, you're not going to believe this, but one of my other clients, so I was a week late, one of her other clients was in labor, in active labor. I'm like, which she was at the same hospital, so it was good, but she was like, I'm going to be here, so I'm going to be bouncing between
the two of you.
Between y'all. Yeah, and, you know, so I'm in the triage waiting, and I'm by myself because my husband, they can't come back immediately. And so she was like, I could hear the other girl, and they checked her, and they're like, you're at 8 centimeters. You're about to have this baby. And I was like, oh, great, you know, wonderful for her. And I'm like, please. My doctor had agreed to do another cervical check before the surgery. And so I had to go. I was having some, like, a little bit of bleeding and stuff, and so they were like, yeah, just go ahead and come in before your, you know, 11:30 surgical prep time. Like, just come now. So we got there a little before 11, and so I was in triage for a while, and I was rubbing Clary Sage everywhere, like, trying to get contractions. And I was having contractions here and there, but nothing consistent. And so my doctor came in, and she checked me, and she was like, you're about 3 to 4 centimeters. The day before I was at 3. She's like, you're at 3 to 4, and his head is -1. So let's break your water and see what happens. And so I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, we were like freaking out. My doula, you know, my husband's freaking out, and I called my doula, and I was like, she's going to break my water. And so she's like, well, okay, so just hang tight. We're going to get you into, you know, labor and delivery room, and we'll do it, and we'll see what happens. And so I was pumped. I was like, yes, like, this is my chance.
Yeah.
And so I get back to the labor and delivery room, and she came in a little while later. It was about 12:30 in the afternoon, and she really wanted me to have an epidural on board just in case things went haywire and we needed to do a C-section. She wanted me to have an epidural so that I could be awake and not have to be put to sleep if it needed to be like an urgent C-section. So I really wanted to try to do it natural with, like, unmedicated, but I agreed to do the epidural just because she was agreeing to let me have a trial of labor.
Right.
and break my water. So so she broke my water, and the water was clear and everything was good. And she's like, okay, so I'm going to let you labor for a little bit, and we'll see, like, what your body does. Like, if you go into labor, great. You know, if you start having regular contractions. And so they got a birth ball for me, and my doula was across the hall with her other client who was seemingly about to be pushing soon because she was 8 centimeters. So my husband and I were just hanging out. The nurse was really nice, and she was excited to, you know, be helping with this labor. And so they got a labor ball for me, and I sat on the edge of the, like, with my arms on the bed, and I was kind of laboring on the ball, and just, I was having some contractions, but they weren't super painful. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, maybe I'm going into labor. And the anesthesiologist came in and introduced himself, and he talked about kind of the risks of a VBAC or a TOLAC, and said, you know, kind of talked about what a rupture would feel like, and, you know, when I needed, if I felt anything like that or felt anything weird, that I needed to let them know. So my husband talked with the anesthesiologist. We talked about just placing the catheter in my back and not dosing it.
Awesome.
You know, and so he was like, yeah, I can certainly do that. So he put the catheter in, he got it placed, and I didn't want to do the medication unless, you know, I wanted pain relief. So I labored for a couple hours, and I wasn't really having much cervical change. I was still, like, just right at, like, a 4, and I wasn't really progressing after a couple hours. And so she was like, let's do a little bit of Pitocin and see if that'll kind of jumpstart things. So I was like, okay. I had Pitocin with my daughter, and I was like, if I'm going to have Pitocin, I think I really want to go ahead and just get the epidural dose. Like, I don't want to be feeling this. So they were like, okay, well, you have to get a full bag of fluids before they'll do the epidural medication. And so they started the IV infusion, and they started the Pitocin, but I didn't know that they had started the Pitocin. And so I'm, like, starting to feel the Pitocin contractions. And I was contracting on my own, like, every 2 to 3 minutes, but they just weren't super strong, I guess. And so she was like, I want you to get in Sims position. They, like, broke the bed down and put one of the stirrups up, and, like, which is on your side with your legs kind of spread apart, kind of like you'd be over a peanut ball, I guess.
Yeah.
In that position. They had a peanut ball, but I think it was too big for me or something, because I couldn't get my leg all the way around it. It was just super uncomfortable. So they arranged the stirrup on the bed to so that I could get in that position. And it was like immediately I felt pressure, like, oh my gosh, like, I can see why they wanted me to be in this position. So they got me in that position, and they had started the infusion, and then I started having to vocalize through contractions. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, whoa, like, these are so strong. And I was kind of like, and my doula was across the hall, and I was like, I may need some support, you know, I may need my doula. So she had a backup doula, and I had met her. And so Ann had already called her, and I didn't know, but I called Ann, and she was like, I've already got her on the way. And so I was like, okay, good. So she came in, like, almost, it was crazy, like, the timing of it, but she came in, and so she was, like, counting and helping me, like, breathe, and we were breathing and, you know, just kind of vocalizing through these contractions, and the Pitocin was going, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, and my husband's like, they turned the Pitocin on. And I was like, what? Like, why did they turn the Pitocin on without giving me the epidural first? Like, I don't want this. But then, you know, I was able to handle it, and it was fine. And so he came in and dosed the epidural, and I started shaking profusely. Like, I was shaking so hard, and I don't know if it was like I was starting to go through transition, or if it was the medicine, I don't know. But my nurse checked my cervix when she put the catheter in after the epidural was dosed. And so I had gone from a 4 to a 7 within, like, an hour. And so I was like, awesome, you know. So at that point, I was shaking and I couldn't really, it was really uncomfortable to keep my leg up. And so they broke the bed down to where I was kind of sitting more in like a squat with my legs kind of below my hips, I guess, to kind of let gravity kind of help. And so by that point, the other client had delivered, and so my doula was there, and then the backup doula was there. So I had two doulas and a husband, and we were just like chatting and kind of enjoying, you know, the epidural. So I was still feeling feeling the pressure of the contractions, but not really. I wasn't in pain, but I was shaking really hard. And so about an hour later, my doctor came back in, and she did another cervical check, and I was about an 8. And so she's like, okay, I want to get you in right sims. I want you to lay on your right side and do the same thing, get your leg up, and we're going to try to bring him down even further. And so we did that. We like put the bed back, and they helped me get all situated. And I started feeling a lot of pressure, like pretty immediately. I started kind of having to vocalize through contractions. I was feeling it, you know, like, oh my gosh, like it was kind of like an overwhelming sensation, like a pressure. And for about an hour, I was in that, and my doula was like, "Do you want me to go get her? Like, do you think you're ready? Do you feel like you need to push?" And I was like, I don't know. And I was just vocalizing and just kind of like, I didn't want her to come in too soon, and you know, have to leave again. And I was kind of nervous to get to that pushing point again, because the last time when I was pushing was when my daughter's heart rate was dropping. And so the whole time the baby was tracing perfectly. He was fine. Like his heart rate was beautiful. And my husband was really nervous, and he didn't really tell me all this until after the birth, but he was nervous, like watching to make sure. I mean, we were both worried. I wasn't worried about rupturing, really. That wasn't really my concern. My concern was the baby not doing well and having to go and have another C-section. And I really didn't want to have my water broken, because I didn't want a potential to have the choreo again. Yeah. But I knew, my doctor had basically said, like, you know, we're not going to wait 24 hours. And, like, if you haven't delivered, and, you know, then we're going to end up going to a C-section, like, you know. So I was like, okay, at least with the water breaking, at least we know, like, things are going to get started, and hopefully everything will end up going the way we want it to. So I'm, like, at 8 centimeters. We got in the Sims position. I'm breathing, and my doula finally, I guess she could tell, like, we were at the point where I was complete. And so my doctor came in, and she checked, and she was like, okay, we're 10. Yay. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like, really, you know. So they broke the bed down. My husband kind of didn't really hear we're at a 10. He was like, what? Like, oh my gosh, you know. So we're like, everybody gets into position, and the lights. So we had the lights off. We had some essential oils diffusing, and, like, you know, it was like a nice, happy little room. And my doctor, they didn't turn all the lights on. She just turned on, like, one light that she needed to be able to see what was going on. And she was just sitting there, and she's like, okay, we're going to start trying to push. And so they were kind of helping me and telling me, like, you know, kind of telling me what to do. And I was, you know, telling me how to kind of, like, hold my breath and not to make noise or really, like, hyperventilate or anything, like, to just focus all of the energy down. And so I was pushing, and everything was looking good. And they're like, okay, good. You know, she's watching the heart rate monitor. Like, that's pretty much what she was doing the whole time. She was watching the baby. And I pushed for about 30 minutes total, which was awesome. After the fact, I felt like it was an eternity. But so I'm pushing, and it was like I had one doula on one leg, the other on the other, and then my husband was helping kind of push my back, like, helping support my shoulders. And in between, they were giving me, like, cold rags with lavender oil and peppermint oil, trying to cool me off. And at one point, I was getting really exhausted, and my doctor was like, can we get, like, she needs some juice or some sugar or something, like, we need just some crackers or something. And so my doula had a honey stick and gave me some honey, and I guess that was kind of like the little boost I needed. And they got a mirror so I could see what was going on, and I could see his little head. And my doctor she was kind of sitting there, and she was watching, you know, and her hair was down, and she was like, okay, and she's sitting there, she's like so calm, and I'm like watching her face. I couldn't see the monitor behind me, but I was watching her face to see like how she was reacting, because I was nervous. If she started looking freaked out, I was going to start freaking out.
Nervous.
My husband, come to find out, he's like, every now and then he was to my left, and I couldn't see him, and he was going over by the sink and kind of like breathing and like, okay, you know. And my doula was like reassuring him, like, it's okay. And then I'd have another contraction, and they'd come and they'd help me push, and so he said I had the mirror and I could see, and then she's like, okay, reach down and pick up your baby. It was like I felt that big, you know, that big amount of pressure, and I had my eyes closed really tight shut because I was trying to push with everything I had to get him out. And his little head came out, and he started crying before he was even out totally. He was crying, and everybody was like laughing. They're just like, I haven't seen this before. Like, the baby's crying and he's not even all the way out. And so she was like, reach down and pick up her baby, and I reached down and put his little warm, slimy body on my chest and held him, and we were crying, and everybody was crying, and just, I mean, it was just crazy. It was so awesome, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was the best moment ever. And he was there, and he was healthy and perfect, and my husband got to cut the cord, and I got to hold him, and he nursed right away, and we held him, and it was over 2 hours. He just was on my chest, just looking around and just sleeping, and it was that magical, you know, that magical time that I wish I would have had with my daughter immediately after she was born, and not be groggy and feel yucky after having surgery. And so I got to hold him, and they finally weighed him, and he weighed 8 pounds 9 ounces and was 22.5 inches long, which was like a really long baby by all the nurses' accounts. Everybody was like, he's so long.
No.
And he was perfectly healthy. He had great APGARs, and he was just a calm little baby, and he's been our little happy, calm baby since. So it was awesome, and my doula was she was so excited that I got the birth that I wanted, and she was like, your doctor is going to be, she's going to remember this birth, and it's like, you know, she's like, I think this really made an impression on her, and she was just like, you know, it was just awesome. And I was like, okay, you know, I mean, of course I thought it was awesome because it was what I wanted, and I'm so pleased. But it was just such a redemptive feeling to like know that I could do it, and that my body could do it, and that I just never gave up. And I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to have a trial labor.
Yes, I love it. I think it's so unique, you know, that you were in there in triage waiting to be prepped for your surgery, and everything just unfolded that way. I love it. And props on your doctor. Your doctor sounds very supportive. Thank you so much for sharing. Although spontaneous labor is always preferable rather than induced or augmented labor, induction of labor for maternal or fetal indications remain an open option in women undergoing a TOLAC, trial of labor after cesarean. According to ACOG, prior low transverse C-section is not a contraindication to induction, other than cytotec. A Foley balloon or Pitocin may be used safely in these women. The problems arise when a practitioner does not believe in doing inductions on women with prior C-sections. Despite the evidence and the ACOG clinical guidelines, the reality is that many doctors may not want to deal with it.
We are always looking for more inspiring stories. To share your story or possibly be on one of our podcasts, post on social media with the hashtag #WhyWeVBAC and tag @the VBAC link, or contact us from our website.
Be sure to rate us and share and leave your reviews. We are excited to hear what you think. For families local to Utah, be sure to check out our website, utahvbaclink.com, for more information on our VBAC childbirth classes and doula services. Thank you so much for listening. We are excited for you to begin your journey with us.